Welcome back, everyone. Thanks for your patience. We were just running a couple of minutes behind. If you were with our last presentation, we were having a great discussion with Ginger Fedak, and so we're just getting caught up and back into the groove, and we're going to hear from Mary Koncel here in just a minute. All right, I'm going to get started. So welcome back, everyone. I'm Jen. Everybody probably knows me at this point. I'm with the Wild Narrative Project, and you are at the 2025 Wild Horse Virtual Summit. We are putting the A in advocacy, in case anyone's forgotten. I don't think anybody's forgotten at this point. I think everybody knows, and this is being put on by Chasing Horses Wild Horse Advocates with Chris Kaman and Save Our Wild Horses with Heather Hellier. So we just want to thank them for all of their hard work, especially at this point, 4.5 days into this summit. These women have been giving their all, and I know that a lot of you are as well, because we are seeing so many familiar faces and commenters and participants. So thank you, everyone. You are here now for Mary Koncel's presentation with speaking to the management of the Devil's Garden Plateau wild horses. This is actually really timely and a great coincidence that I'm moderating for Mary today. I have been working with Mary for, gosh, it feels like a really long time, Mary, even though I don't think it has been that long.
I don't even think it's a year yet. So
I don't think
we'll have
so.
to celebrate in a year. Have an
We
anniversary
will.
party.
Mary and I ran into each other briefly with the American Wild Horse Campaign several years ago, and we really hit it off. I think for me, I really admired Mary's wordsmithing, her attitude, and her dogged researching. And now that the Wild Narrative Project has been founded, we're a California-based nonprofit newsroom, and as the Forest Service has threatened to eradicate this herd, I got in touch with Mary and said, hey, are you interested? And I think right around the same time, Mary was like, hey, let's do this. We've got to get more information out here. This is California's iconic herd, and they're being lost in the shuffle. So Mary's been doing some fantastic work for years around Devil's Garden. Mary has a background in public policy and in journalism. As I said, she's a fantastic wordsmith, and she really has studied this herd and the management practices. And without further ado, I'm going to be quiet and have Mary share her presentation.
Thanks, Jen, so much for that lovely introduction. And it's been such a pleasure meeting you. And I'm so glad that you didn't become, I think it was a bag lady riding a horse in Texas.
Yeah. I mean, I'm still doing the same sort of stuff, nonprofit, so not a lot of money.
Yeah. Yeah, you're in California instead of Texas. So.
Yeah, caring for the environment and wild horses. Here we go.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So anyway, and I also want to thank Chris and Heather for organizing this really important summit. And also, I want to wish everybody a happy Groundhog Day. I didn't realize it was Groundhog Day until my husband told me. So being able to talk about the Devil's Garden wild horses at the summit is very timely because the Forest Service is poised to release the 2024 revised territory management plan that will replace the 2013 territory management plan. And unfortunately, while there was hope that this new management plan would address the problems of the previous management plan, I don't think I'm alone in believing that it will continue to prioritize subsidized livestock grazing over the protection and preservation of this Devil's Garden herd. Next slide. Most of you know this, but the Wild Horse and Burro Act gave the Bureau of Land Management and the Forest Service the responsibility of protecting and managing America's wild herds living on federal lands. Now, the BLM is under the Department of Interior, and the Forest Service is under the Department of Agriculture. Because the BLM manages the majority of our wild horses and burros compared to the Forest Service, People are more familiar with that agency because most news is about BLM wild horses and burros. Now, this can be just a little problematic because it allows the Forest Service to fly under the radar. And that's my term, meaning that when folks hear about something going on with the Forest Service, they frequently don't distinguish between the two agencies and blame the BLM when they really should be directing their frustration, anger, or whatever at the Forest Service and holding that agency accountable. Um, Also, the BLM and Forest Service work under very different regulations. For example, an individual can purchase up to 4 wild horses or burros from the Bureau of Land Management in a 6-month period, but the Forest Service allows an individual to purchase up to 24 horses or burros each day with no restrictions on how many days that individual can come back for more. I want to just talk a little bit more about the Forest Service and its wild horse and burro program. According to very outdated information from 2014, the Forest Service is responsible for 53 wild horse and burro territories on about 2.5 million acres of national forest in 9 Western states. Of those territories, 34 are inactive, and that means that wild horses or burros still live on them, but at least 19 are inactive, meaning that they no longer have horses or burros. But ironically, from several FOIA requests, I learned that about 7 or 8 of these inactive territories allow significant private livestock grazing. In terms of population, the last estimate is that there's about maybe 7,100 wild horses and about 900 to 1,000 wild burros living on these active territories. Next slide. About the Devil's Garden. Until somewhat recently, Devil's Garden was considered not only home to California's largest wild horse herd, but also the Forest Service's largest wild horse territory in terms of acreage and number of horses. I also believe it's the most controversial. It's located on the National Forest. No, I'm sorry, it's located on the Modoc National Forest in Northeast California, just outside of Alturas, California. It consists of about 258,000 acres, mostly Forest Service land and some BLM tribal and private land. It's a forest, so there are lots and lots of trees. And because it's a lava-strewn plateau, the terrain is very, very rugged. If you think about walking on the rocks in a stream or river that doesn't have any water, that's kind of what it's like. So imagine what it must be like for the horses when they are being chased by helicopters over it. Next slide. I just wanted to give you some numbers. Oh, wait a minute. I think okay. Oh, okay. I wanted to give you a map of the Devil's Garden Wild Horse Territory. The two solid brown areas are the east and west sections, and that striped area is the middle section, and I'll be referring back to that. Jen, is there a slide with numbers?
Yeah, the next
Okay.
one. Here we
Yeah,
go.
next one. Okay, I just, yeah. Okay, I wanted to give you some numbers about the roundups and to get an unscientifically low appropriate management level, or AML, of 206 to 402 horses. The Modoc National Forest has used roundups as its only management tool. And as we all know, they're inhumane, ineffective, and expensive. And I'm just going to give you a second to look at those. Since 2016, about 3,100 horses have been removed. And in terms of the expense, according to usaspending.com, the awards for just the contractors between 2018 and 2024 amounted to about $4.5 million. And I'm going to be rounding up these numbers just to make it easier for me to read and not to totally confuse you. But that $4.5 million is just the beginning. The final costs are hard to come by for each roundup, but the projected budget in the Forest Service work plan system for the 2020 roundup, for example, came to over $1.4 million. This figure includes the $500,000 contract with Couture to conduct the helicopter roundup, $261,000 for Forest Service personnel, $165,000 for transportation, $141,000 for hay, and $80,000 for a multi-year contract with the MODOC Veterinarian Services. And I got these figures from a FOIA request. Next slide. Currently, the Devil's Garden horses are still being managed under the 2013 Territory Management Plan. And quite simply, this management plan was bought and paid for by ranching interests that primarily include the Modoc Farm Bureau, but also Modoc County, the Modoc County Cattlemen Association, and ranchers with grazing permits on Devil's Garden. Now, if you're wondering how this could happen, the reason is that the Forest Service has no dedicated funding for its wild horse and burro program. So in the case of the Modoc National Forest, it looks to partners to help fund and implement the management of the Devil's Garden horses. Here are two examples of that funding. First, in 2011, the Modoc County Board of Supervisors approved $50,000 to, one, begin a retired workers program pilot project that would employ retired state and federal workers to start data collection and environmental documentation for the wild horse roundup and removal, and two, contract for a wild horse and burro specialist to develop the 2013 EA and conduct an aerial census of wild horses inside and outside the territory. Second, between 2012 and 2016, 990s filed by the Modoc Farm Bureau show that it distributed $368,000 to hire retired federal workers to go into the field with GPS cameras to record data on wild horses and the impacts they are making on allotments. So much for objectivity. The result of this partnership is a territory management plan that essentially is a plan to ensure that massive private livestock grazing will continue and that wild horses would not be competition for valuable forage and water. Three major points in this 2013 management plan are the following. It sets the AML at 206 to 402 horses while allowing up to 3,700 cow and calf pairs and 2,900 sheep. Instead of implementing a PZP fertility control program and rangeland improvements, it prioritizes the use of roundups and actually prohibits the use of fertility control until AML is reached. It also eliminates the 23,000 acres of the middle section of the territory. Now, besides removing over 3,000 wild horses from their families and or separating them from their families and removing them from their federally designated habitat, the 2013 plan also resulted in the deaths of hundreds of horses and foals transferred to the care of the Forest Service's Double Devil wild horse corrals located on the Modoc National Forest. These are just some examples. In 2019, three horses were euthanized after crashing into the corral panels or being trampled by other horses. And 9 horses were euthanized after contracting salmonella at a layover during transport when they were being sold and shipped to Florida. In 2021, 3 wiggling colts were euthanized due to post-castration evisceration. One stallion died. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me start again. In 2020, 2020, 11 stallions were euthanized after being gelded due to post-castration evisceration, and 2 foals were born prematurely and euthanized. In 2021, 3 weanling colts were euthanized due to post-castration evisceration. 1 stallion died after breaking his neck while being loaded in the squeeze chute for gelding, and 1 mare was found dead from no known cause. And also, 6 weanling colts were found dead in a pen after a mountain lion attack. Once again, I got this information from FOIA requests. Additionally, there are other post-Roundup welfare issues. While the agency boasts a high adoption rate, or I should say placement rate, many of the horses in foals are sold. This means that they lack the protections of the adoption contract, and their titles pass immediately to the owners, allowing them to flip the horses at any time. Further, because Forest Service horses are microchipped instead of freeze branded like BLM horses, identifying them at kill pens is next to impossible. And yes, they are turning up there. Now, regarding lawsuits, the 2013 plan resulted in several of them. In 2012, Wild Horse Advocacy Group sued the Forest Service for arbitrarily eliminating that 23,000 acre middle section. 5 years later, in 2017, the court ruled in favor of the advocates and ordered the Forest Service to reconsider its decision to shrink the Devil's Garden territory. And 7 years later, after that, in 2024, the Forest Service developed the revised 2024 plan to address this issue as well as several others. Then in 2017, the Devil's Garden Preservation Group, a collection of vocal and entitled local ranchers, sued the Modoc National Forest. This is quite ironic for not reaching AML fast enough. To appease them, in a 2021 sweetheart settlement, the Forest Service agreed to remove at least 500 horses every year until AML is reached, even though no science or data supports this plan. Finally, I want to mention 2 fairly new and disturbing developments, and Ginger mentioned one of them. The first is Gonacon experiments on Devil's Garden mares and stallions. In 2023, the United States Geological Survey vaccinated 31 mares from the Double Devil corrals with Gonacon, placed tracking collars on them, and then released them back to the territory. Then there's the Wildlife Services study that Ginger mentioned that vaccinated an undisclosed number of Devil's Garden stallions with Gonacon at some undisclosed time and released them at some undisclosed location, but most likely it is the territory. Here's the problem, especially with that last one. The United States Environmental Protection Agency's label for Gonacon specifically states that the accidental injection of males will result in infertility. And I want to thank Bonnie Colrider for digging up this piece of information. So why is Wildlife Services conducting a study which crosses multiple ethical and legal boundaries to determine if Gonacon will sterilize stallions when it's already known that it will? When I asked the Modoc National Forest for the protocols of both studies, they refused to provide them and said that a FOIA request had to be filed. The second development, and you might have already heard about this, is the resumed roundup of the 2024 fall roundup that supposedly ended less than 3 months ago. The Forest Service did not issue a press release on its website, but a January 14th post on its Facebook page stated that the operation will begin again on January 21st. In order to continue moving toward the AML of 206 to 402 horses on the territory as prescribed by the 2013 Territory Management Plan. But here's the kicker. The roundup didn't begin on January 21st. It began on January 18th. But and the Forest Service has issued no updates on the roundup since January 21st because according to the most recently appointed Modoc Forest Supervisor, the new administration has issued a freeze on all Forest Service communications, including website posts, social media, and press releases. So the American public has absolutely no idea what's going on with this operation, even though we're paying for it. Next slide. Okay, as I mentioned in the beginning of the presentation, the Forest Service is expected to finalize and release the 2024 management plan that will determine the future of the Devil's Garden wild horses for the next 10 years. Originally, they were supposed to release it in January, but it's clearly been delayed. Now, while lawsuits and public scrutiny brought some hope that this plan would correct the multitude of problems in its press in its in the previous management plan and commit to preserving and protecting the Devil's Garden herd, I don't believe this is going to happen. Thanks to the Modoc National Forest partnership with local ranching interests, this revised plan is no more than a thinly disguised extinction plan for the Devil's Garden horses and another victory for cheap, subsidized private grazing on public lands. Here's why. Although the 2024 plan allows for fertility control, it's in the form of Gonacon, which, as Ginger has talked about, has a growing reputation for causing permanent sterility or infertility in mares. It also continues to maintain that low AML of 200 to 400 horses while allowing high levels of private livestock grazing. It authorizes additional roundups in order to appease the Devil's Garden Preservation Group. And in response to the 2017 court decision, it adjusts the middle section to a mere 114-acre corridor between the east and west sections of the Devil's Garden territory. All this shouldn't be a surprise because once again, this territory management plan was bought and paid for by the Modoc Farm Bureau. According to its 990s, between 2020 and 2023, it contributed almost $2 million, and this is going to sound really familiar, to hire retired federal employees to collect data to show the impacts that wild horses have on land allotments and to assist the United States Department of Agriculture to manage the wild horse population. Next slide. As Jen talked about, there's a lot of issues with transparency and accountability with the United States Forest Service and the Modoc National Forest. Observation, whenever you go to a Devil's Garden roundup, you can be pretty much assured that observation is going to be totally obscured. The previous public affairs officer was also downright hostile to wild horse supporters and often refused to answer questions. Frequently, it takes a long time for the Modoc National Forest to respond to emails, and when they do respond, the answer is often vague or they tell you to file a FOIA request. And this is problematic because if you've ever filed a FOIA request, you know it can take months, if not years, to get records. And also, this new freeze on communication makes transparency and accountability even worse. Next slide. So, what's the future of the Devil's Garden wild horses? I fear that Devil's Garden could become the next inactive territory. And the reason for this thinking is the combination of the Modoc National Forest's ongoing partnership with the Modoc Farm Bureau, the use of Gonacon, the continuing roundups, and the absence of current and reliable science to determine management policies. Next slide. Because this is an advocacy summit and because I want to be somewhat optimistic, I want to ask you all to think about completing two simple actions that you can take to help the Devil's Garden horses. The first one is, and I've included the links for both of them. The first one is you can sign a petition to Governor Newsom requesting that he intervene and ask the Forest Service to withdraw the 2024 management plan and replace it with one that prioritizes cost-effective, scientifically proven, and humane alternatives. You can also email your legislators, and this is especially important for California residents, requesting that they ask the Forest Service to withdraw the management plan until the GAO can investigate it. And the GAO is the Government Accountability Office. I do believe we still have time for this petition and also for the emails to the legislators. So next slide. Oh, okay. This is information that where you can get more. I'm sorry, this is a slide to provide more information about how you can connect with Wild Narrative Project and also Chasing Horses. And next slide. This pretty much covers what I have to say, but before we go on to chat, on behalf of my little BLM herd, Rain and Huck and Puck, and their still wild counterparts, I want to thank you all for attending the summit and caring for our wild herds and public lands. I also want to thank Jen for her Wild Narrative Project, which has been investigating and posting numerous articles about Devil's Garden. Please visit their website or her website or its website and follow Wild Narrative Project on Instagram. I want to thank my very good friend Chris for hosting action alerts for the Devil's Garden wild horses and sharing blogs about the ongoing mismanagement of this iconic herd and creating a special web page for them. She's been beyond wonderful. And also much appreciation to Heather for sharing posts and the action alerts on her Facebook page. As I mentioned, the information to get a hold or to get information is on the previous slide for Wild Narrative Project and also that special page that Chris created. And you all know where to find Saving Our Wild Horses Facebook page. Thank you.
Mary, thank you so much.
Jen, if you want to go back and put up the link to so that they know where to get more information, you can leave it up and I can add the final
Oh,
link
that's great.
to the
Yeah,
video.
I reversed the slides, so
Oh, sorry. Yep. Let me
that
do
was
that.
my fault, Jen. That was my fault.
No, that's
I
okay.
also added in the chat the links to the two action items. One is just a one-click email to send to your legislators, and one is to sign the petition. And then, as always, we invite people, don't just take action yourself. Ask your husband, your friend, your neighbor,
Yep.
whoever else you can to also do it.
And this is exactly why Chris is wonderful so, and efficient.
Absolutely. So, you know, every time, Mary, I've gotten very close to this herd and obviously reporting about it. And every time you go back and read all of those numbers, it's honestly atrocious. And so thank you for being so close to it and for continuing to dig and continuing to stay on top of it. A lot of people here are really appreciative
Thank you.
of your thorough and ongoing report. Craig says thank you so much for a very thorough and ongoing report. Thanks for these interesting insights. So let's see. A couple people say, can you provide the data and numbers so that you can find them on social media? If y'all head to wildnarrativeproject.org/news, the vast majority of our recent reporting is on Devil's Garden, written by Mary, and you will find all of those statistics in those pieces. Great, thank you. And it's accessible. It's cited all of Mary's sources as we've been talking about, making sure that we stick to facts and data from reputable sources. That's all in the bottom of every article, so you can research yourself and see what's happening. Mary, remind everyone, if you didn't already say, how long you have been researching and involved with this herd.
Oh, wow. I think it's been since 2008, 17 or 18. So about, I guess, 7 years, 6, 7 years.
Yeah. And I thought it would be interesting to chat briefly about how, so you were giving all of that, just like every piece of information that you give, every data point is almost more atrocious than the last. I wanted to speak a little bit more too, because I think what's really interesting is, we were talking about the herds disappearing in wild horse territories and in HMAs, and how a lot of them are being zeroed out. And I thought it would be interesting, you spoke to the ranching industry in a settlement, getting the U.S. Forest Service to agree to removing at least 500 horses every year. But I thought you could speak to, um, sorry, I just got distracted by a comment. If you could speak to how few horses the Forest Service is finding, and just a little bit more to how that relates to the ongoing and unprecedented
Sure.
resuming of
Yeah.
the.
Hold on one second. I just want to try to get some numbers here. I know it's hard, and I hope I didn't overwhelm you with too many numbers, but I just feel like they're so important so that people know what's going on. I think the numbers that strike me the most is it have to do with the last couple years. And I hope you can follow me in this, and I'm not being too much of a number nerd. But according to the 2024 spring census on the territory, there were an estimated 723 horses. But after the removal of those horses, of 341 horses this fall, that brought the number down to about 380. Uh, I think the concern at this point is that if an additional 150 horses are removed in the next few weeks to meet that mandated 500 horse minimal, that's going to bring the estimated number, and I always want to keep emphasizing estimated number, to about 220 horses, which is low AML and well below mid AML. And so that's concerning. That's very concerning, because if you think about the remaining horses left on the territory, remember that 30 mares, and actually one of the original 31 was killed by a mountain lion, and an unknown number of stallions were vaccinated by Gonacon. If these horses experience a dramatic drop in population, which appears to have occurred between 2023 and 2024, how would they recover when a significant number of its mares and stallions are now non-reproducing or sterilized?
Right. Yeah, and it's really wild. I know that a lot of people that are participating in this summit have been out to roundups. I
Mhm.
know that several of you have actually observed professionally for different advocacy and news groups. And what is really interesting, Devil's Garden is a good example of what happens when it appears that the agency is doing work to zero out the horses. I'll give a quick anecdote. In June, I took a film crew out, and we had heard this lore that despite the ranching industry in the area and the U.S. Forest Service stating that there are so many horses. I mean, I think in the late
Mhm.
teens, they were saying there are thousands of horses, there are
Right,
thousands of them.
right.
Yeah, and so we were like, okay, but then we had heard from advocacy and environmental groups in the area that you can go and you can hike for days, you can drive for days, and you cannot see a single wild horse. And we were like, well, is that true? We're gonna see if we can go improve it, sort of that citizen reporting area. And so we went and we hiked in cardinal directions for 4 days, about
Mhm.
20 miles of hiking, and also over 1,000 miles of driving, and we saw 7 to 9 total wild
Yep.
horses. I say 7 to 9 because we may have seen a repeat mare and foal,
Mhm.
but they are so skittish from what seems to be recent years of torment by helicopter and being chased, that they are very leery about anyone
Yep.
being anywhere close. I mean, I'm talking like binoculars and they're still far away. So that's just a testament to how few there really appear to be
Yeah.
remaining.
Yeah. And what you just mentioned about not seeing many horses, I think that's a common experience for a lot of people who visit the Devil's Garden wild horse territory. I've been up there maybe 10 times, and granted, probably 6 times, maybe 7 were during roundups, and horses obviously are disturbed. But I think I've seen maybe a dozen horses. But what you will see, and Jen, tell me if you agree with this, is literally hundreds, if not thousands, of calf pairs with cattle, and that's what's so maddening because it just feels like I remember in 2018 the Modoc Forest folks were saying there were like 4,000 wild horses out there. Well, according to their census, um, there weren't 4,000 horses. There were maybe 3,000, something horses. And in 2016, there were like, I don't know, a little over 2,000. So, and that's kind of an ongoing issue with the census because, and I'm going to try to get this right. If I misspeak, correct me. Um, Wild horse supporters believe that the census numbers are too high. Okay. And livestock folks believe that the census numbers are too low. So it's like, what's the reality? But when you start cutting a herd down to 300, 400 horses, what happens if the numbers truly are much lower? And what happens if there's a bad winter? In I think in 2023, there were supposedly, according to the census, over about 1,340 horses. The next year, there were 723 horses this year in the census. And now, granted, 240 horses were removed in the fall of 2023, but that still leaves maybe 300 horses unaccounted for. So, was it a miscount of the census? Was there, like I said, a bad winter? Was there predation? You know, what's happening? What's the reality? And I just, like I said, when we're getting down to these very, very low numbers, and especially with the use of Gonacon, whether it's in the research projects or what they're going to be using in the 2024 management plan, I truly fear that this herd could face extinction. It
Yeah.
just will not be able to maintain the healthy numbers that it's needed.
Well, and I wanted to address, I corroborate through my experience in June,
Yeah,
which was different, I will say, when we were, so I attended just one day of the roundup in the
right.
fall with Mary, and actually Janine
Yep,
um,
Jeannie's there.
was there, and she's raising her hand, so I'm going to get to her in just a second since she
And we
did
were all freezing.
observe. We froze. It was really frigid, and I admire people that go and stand to witness during wild horse roundups for the public. It was profound. But what I wanted to get back to was that I did not see cattle. I saw evidence of cattle when we were
Right,
at
yeah.
Lauer Reservoir. In fact, equal amount, if not more, of cattle evidence than wild horses. However, in June, when I was there hiking all over the place, I mean, this is a map of Modoc behind me for anybody that can see, and we were all over the place. But we did, when we saw that 7 to 9 horses over the course of 4 days, we saw dozens, if not hundreds, of cattle. And I think the biggest thing that I witnessed is that, there's one, I believe, oh gosh, who was it? It was Janelle talking to us a few days ago from the Oregon Wild Horse
Mhm.
um, Association. No. Oh,
I know, yeah.
yes, organization. She was talking about this one paper that constantly, or this one data point that constantly gets brought up about how much time wild horses spend at watering holes versus cattle or livestock, and that paper says that wild horses spend something like 70% of their time at a watering hole. Don't quote me on that. But what I observed at Modoc in June over those 4 days is that
Mm.
every time we came across a watering hole in a riparian area, there were at least a dozen cows with hocks deep, not moving, standing in water. And multiple times as we would drive through or hike through and then return down that same road hours later, those exact same cows were standing in the water and congregating around the watering hole. And not once over the 4 days did we see a wild horse near water.
I totally agree. When I was up there in September a couple years ago, we saw no wild horses. This was before a roundup. And like I said, we saw hundreds of cows. And like your experience, it was very, very hot. So they were enjoying, being in the water in the different riparian areas. And, who could blame them? So,
Right.
but
And this
yeah,
was public land. Like this
yeah,
is,
yeah.
we were not
And
observing
private, yeah, yeah,
privately on land.
yeah.
Mary, would you be cool if I give Janine just a couple of minutes? She's had her
Oh,
hand
sure, not at
raised,
all.
and I
Yeah,
just
yeah.
want to I'm gonna have Janine speak briefly because Janine observed at the Devil's Garden Wild Horse Roundup both recently while it's been ongoing and at the beginning of it in late October 2024. Janine also is a resident of Cedarville, which is just kind of down the road from Devil's Garden. So, okay, Janine, let me see. Can you hear us? Can you chat?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Hey,
thank you for
Janine.
being here.
Hi, thank you. Thank you, Mary. I just wanted to follow up on what Mary was saying about the amount of horses rounded up. I was able to go to something called a steering committee meeting this fall in Cedarville. And at that meeting were people from the BLM, Modoc Forest, and Fish and Game, and Laura Snell was there, who she does Mustang training or something with the young foals. Anyway, Craig Drake, BLM, was talking about if they round up the carters, there's an issue with holding facilities. And so Laura Snell said that they're looking into a partnership, that Devil's Garden is looking at a partnership with people here because they rounded up so few foals from Devil's Garden. There's a lack of foals for them to use in their training program, the Mustang training for the young kids in the area or something. So I found that
Yeah,
interesting.
they have it. Yeah, they have a Laura Schnell, who is not a supporter of wild horses. In fact, she endorses um, horse slaughter. She is the UC Davis, I think it's the cooperative extension agent up on the Modoc. But anyway, she has organized a cult challenge. And what that is that kids from the area, and I think now other parts of California, come up and take young foals and train them. And then they have a competition during the summertime. And then the kids either keep the horses or I think sell them. So I've heard in the past that they were running short on colts, or I hate just to say colts because there's colts and fillies. So it's not surprising, Janine, that they're maybe looking at other herds. And it also speaks to, how much reproduction is going on Devil's Garden. So I'm really glad you brought that up.
I'm going to be devil's advocate
'cause-
here for a minute.
Go ahead.
Janine, when was the hearing meeting that you attended? Can you remember?
I have it in notes. I want to say October. It was this
October.
fall.
Okay. So
Mhm.
what I find interesting, and again, I think this is an inconsistency that's important, is that in the survey, the aerial survey that they put out with the 2024 EA and with the results where they made the decision to start the roundup, they said they actually observed 0 foals
Yep,
in.
yep, that's a good point,
Yes.
Jen.
And then through the whole of November, the 34 days of the initial roundup, what we all thought was going to be the only roundup, they brought in, again, don't quote me, but I want to say maybe 40 foals.
Yeah, I would agree with that number.
And so that's confusing.
Mhm.
And we have experienced a lot of and Janine, I think you would agree. I know you would agree because I know that you have been doing the good work to send emails and ask questions and hold the Forest Service accountable, along with Mary, that we have received a lot of inconsistent answers. I will say we do, when we press, get some information. But it has been inconsistent. The reasoning
Yeah,
on a daily
yeah.
basis and on a yearly basis has been very
Mhm.
inconsistent. And then I want to ask one last question, and then I'm going to turn it over to anybody else that has questions. But I think we've had such a good conversation here. We've answered a lot of questions.
Mhm.
So, Mary, are you comfortable sharing? So Mary's working on another update for Wild Narrative Project, as we now are in a communications freeze as far as the
Yeah.
MODOC putting out public information without us having to go to them to ask for it. So Mary, I'm curious, I know as of about a week ago, you had prompted and sent a couple of emails to
Yeah,
a couple of different officials, again,
exactly. Yeah.
asking for more information. Have you received correspondence back from them?
No, no. The last email I had gotten was from the newest Forest Service supervisor. I think there's maybe been 8 or 10 in the past 5 or 6 years. He was very nice. He did verify that there was a freeze on Forest Service communication, and he said he would get back to me at some point, or they would get back to me at some point about my other questions. But I just wanted to point out that Jen did some good poking around. She checked in with the BLM, and she found that I don't. Correct me if this isn't if I'm wrong about this, but she found out that she didn't get a response from the BLM national office as to whether or not they also had a communication freeze. But I think you did say that you talked to somebody at a local BLM office, and they said, or he said, she said, that they hadn't experienced, they haven't had such an order. So that's kind of interesting.
That's accurate. And so just reiterating what Mary said, at the district level, we spoke with Fantana, I think is the guy's last name. He's a
Yeah.
district level public affairs
Okay.
officer,
Yeah.
and he was very helpful. And he said, no, we have had nothing in my office has reached us about a directive to freeze communications. We did reach
Right.
out to BLM National, have not heard. However, anecdotally, the BLM did on the 31st of January publicize through a press release their 2025 grazing fees. So they are publishing press releases, at least in that aspect. So I know
Okay.
that they haven't completely frozen. We also reached out to California Fish and Wildlife and have not heard back from them, which is unusual because I've had really helpful conversations between their public affairs officers and their actually their wolf program.
Oh, great.
So I'm not sure. I will say, you know, in I know that a lot of advocates and anyone doing a deep dive and really investigating that we feel that BLM as a whole can be challenging to work with, but want to reiterate that a lot of that is at the leadership level, and the people that are working, it is an understaffed agency. There's a lot of influence when you're a newbie that I've seen. When you're a newbie, you come in, you immediately get indoctrinated into the culture there, which is not supportive of wild horses in general and burros in
Yeah.
general. And a communications freeze is going to make these officers' jobs much more difficult. So I just want to make sure we all remember that and have that in mind. I'm not saying to take the pressure off, but just consider that. Um, Okay, so I'm not going to ramble anymore. Let's see. Do we have any questions?
Not
Mary
rambling.
and I and Janine can talk about, and Monica, if Monica's on the call somewhere,
Yeah,
Monica
yeah,
Ross,
yeah.
who's been out to observe for Wild Narrative. We can talk about Devil's Garden all day. So let's see. Chris and Heather, are we missing any questions as I've been?
It looks like Heather has answered a lot of questions, which is great.
Awesome. Thank you, Heather. Appreciate that. Yeah, Craig says, this is truly managing for extinction by Modoc National Forest of this precious and historic and actually very beneficial Mustang herd. I just as an end comment, we're planning to do some more reporting around this, but yeah, I mentioned earlier in my talk that I was using an example of my M&M effect, which I think a lot of people are giggling about. I hope we're all giggling kindly. So I was talking about like what's the rebuttal when someone says, okay, but these are local communities, it's feeding local communities, it's a rural economy. And there's a lot of truth to that. There's also the other side of that. As it relates to Devil's Garden, the location where the vast majority of the trap sites have been located, both for the end of the 2024 gather and the ongoing 2025 gather, it's at Lauer Reservoir, which is right here on my map. This
I'm
is
so
all
impressed,
Modoc.
Jen.
So Lauer Reservoir is at an allotment called Immigrant Spring or Immigrant Springs allotment. And the cattle in the several hundreds that graze that allotment, not year round, but for a good part of the year, and definitely when forage is good, they are owned by a multi-millionaire who lives in San Jose, about 4 hours away.
Yep.
And that guy's name is Barry Swenson. You can Google him.
And he
Don't
owns Alturas Ranches.
He owns Alturas Ranches. So yay, Monica is here. Hi, Monica.
Hey,
So
Monica.
I just yeah, I don't know why I'm throwing that in there. I
No,
think
well,
it comes.
I think, I mean, I think it's important to realize that that livestock grazing on public lands can be important to some ranchers. But, and I know we've talked about this, Jen, but more and I shouldn't say more and more, but there's there are numbers that show a lot of the grazing allotments are owned by large corporations. And so that, in my mind, I think really contradicts this notion that, that the grazing allotments are necessary, in order to preserve, local ranching. In some cases, yes, probably. But we also need to look at the effect of, industrial agriculture and how that's affecting, the grazing on our public lands, whether it's BLM or Forest Service. And is it David Phillips? He wrote, oh gosh, I'm trying to remember the name of the book, but he went
Wild
through
Horse Country.
Wild Horse Country. Was it him or maybe it wasn't him? Anyway, I could, if anybody's interested, and you probably know the book, but I was just amazed at how he went through and really started to show, once again, that this private livestock grazing on public lands, it's not just only for local ranching families. Like I said, there are huge corporations that are taking advantage of, this very, very cheap grazing.
Yep. Juliana asks, is there a phone number to call for the Devil's Garden horses?
There is, it depends what you want. I mean, if you want to call the Modoc National Forest, there is a general number there. And I don't remember obviously what it is, but if you go to their website or, Google it, you'll be able to find it.
Yep. Yes, you can. It's pretty,
Yeah,
it should be pretty easy to get in touch, and they'll get you in touch with someone,
yeah, depending on
someone
what your
else.
question is, yeah.
And then
I'm sorry.
Mary, I was just going to give one more. So it's Wild Horse Country was by David Phillips. And then there's another one, Land.
Yes, that's the one I'm thinking of, Jen. And
Yeah, so it's by Chris Ketchum.
yes, that's the one. Yeah, I confused the two.
Ketchum.
Yeah,
I,
Chris,
I
yeah,
mu-
yeah.
Ketchum, and it's called um I
Are you
just
talking about this land or a different book?
This Land. It's This
Yes,
Land.
Yeah,
Thank
This
you,
Land. Oh,
Heather.
such
It
a good
is
book.
Thanks,
it's
Heather.
Everybody needs to read
incredible.
that one.
Yeah,
And
it's wonderful.
it is. And for anyone that I'm gonna make one more plea. I'm actually having Wild Narrative has a intern starting next week, and I've already got her listening to this audiobook. If anyone is, yes, Heather. Been talking so much. It's This Land by Christopher Ketchum.
Yeah.
Anyone that is into audiobooks, I highly recommend this. The author narrates his own book. He's got a great voice. It's so inflective, if that's a word. He uses great inflection. It is a long read. You will need to walk or meditate or breathe during it. It is, we've had the hard conversations here in this forum. He continues to do that and shares even more shocking details, but it's very well researched. He's a investigative reporter and has reported for every respectable, at some point respectable news outlet. I encourage more women to get out there and write books. But I'm very glad to have his thorough investigation and that he put it all in a book. It's like a 16-hour read, but do it. Just do it.
And
Okay.
it's so compelling, but at the same time disturbing to
Yes,
to see what's happening to our public lands. So.
it is. It's This Land by Christopher Ketchum.
Yes. Mhm.
Yeah. Okay, great.
We have a book review or a book group to talk about these books.
It's worth
Yeah.
it's worth it. It's one of the books that I give to people coming in on the issue, especially from the reporting and like stepping out of the fray of the wild horse issue and understanding how public lands are treated and what like who's in whose pockets as far as power goes. So yes. Thank you, Deborah. Yes, Lindsay, it's excellent. Okay. I think we might be wrapping.
Great, great. And I noticed just on the chat that people have signed those, either the petition or sent an email. And I just really want to thank you for doing that because there is still time and sometimes we just have to be hopeful. And I know Angela said if anybody wants to email me, I can give you my email address. Should I give it to you or what would be the best?
Please do. Can you drop it in the group chat right now, Mary? Because actually I'm looking back to make sure I've caught every comment. And
I'm having trouble with my group chat.
okay, I'm gonna do it.
Can you do it for me? Yeah. It's
Yeah.
Koncel@verizon.net.
All right, everybody can see that. Good. Great. Mary, thank you so much. It's always a gift to talk to you.
I know. It was so wonderful to meet you in person. And Chris and I had talked, I don't know how long it was, for many years. And was it last year, Chris, we finally met? Or 2 years ago at the rally, and then I went back to Theodore Roosevelt, and it was just so wonderful. It's nice to meet people, over the phone or via Zoom, but it's always so great to meet people in person.
It
So,
is.
I also want to add, just because I know Mary's very humble, when Mary was so instrumental in helping educate me in our fight for the Theodore Roosevelt wild horses, I cannot say enough great things about this woman. I'm just going to put you on the spot, Mary. Like, if you have a question about anything, not just these horses, just ask Mary because she knows.
no, that's very sweet of you, Chris. But I have to say, I've learned so much from Chris, and with Devil's Garden, there's so many times when I went to her and said, what kind of action can we do? How, what would be the best strategy? And you've always been so helpful. And I really I really like the fact that there are numerous people you can go to talk with in the wild horse and Burl. I have to remember Burl because Lori Ford is a good friend of mine and public lands world. And there's some great people out there and they've become really good friends. So, and I like the fact that, you know, people are willing to share and help each other. I think, frankly, I think we need more of that in the wild horse and Burl and public lands.
I agree, but I think, Mary, you went like above and beyond, because I can't say that for at least like probably 2022, 2023, and at least until April of 24, that there was not a week that went by that we didn't talk. And I'm going to say that's putting it mildly. Like, if there were a couple of days that we didn't talk,
Yeah.
it was, I think my husband was wondering what was wrong with me if I didn't
Yeah,
talk.
I know. If I didn't talk to you, it's like, where's Chris? You know, it's like, you know, chocolate or caffeine. So, no,
But just someone who's helped me just understand, there was so much to understand, and there is so much, and that's why we put this on. And I know it's a lot over 5 days, but
yeah,
that's why the videos are available, so you can go back. Heather and I are going to have some follow-up videos to kind of just be able to elaborate a little bit more on topics. Like, honestly, I know Ginger's on here. Hopefully we can
yeah,
get Ginger back and just have an open conversation, because
that
there
would
were
be
so many
great.
questions we couldn't get to. So things like that. So whatever we can do just to bring as many people together and share knowledge, I think is great.
Yeah. And I also, just to echo something that Lori Ford said, when you advocate, just remember the wild burros too, because they are such amazing animals and we just can't forget them.
I think
And
everybody's eyes were open yesterday with her
yeah,
presentation.
yeah, they're really
So
between what, you know, the work she's doing, Lori's doing, and the work that Kathy, there's just, like I said, we adopted our two. They were pulled from a kill pen. They were part of the AIP program. And I know I always tell you this, Chris, and I know I tell you this, Jen, too, but we just love them. They make us laugh every day, and we've learned so much from them, and they're just such soulful, amazing animals. So anyway, do not forget our burros and the Devil's Garden horses. So thank you again, everybody. You've been great, and I wish you the best. And keep
Thank
up
you,
the good
Mary.
work. Okay,
This
bye.
presentation has been so well received.
Thank
Don't
you.
leave before we can tell you all the comments. Thank you, Mary. Thank you so much. This is
Thank
so
you.
important. Thank you.
But,
This has been amazing.
and Jen and Chris will talk soon. So,
yes,
You
we
know
will.
it.
okay, bye.
Okay. Bye, everyone.